It's 1944. A 14-year-old boy walked into an execution chamber too small for the electric chair that would end his life. A life taken away from not only from a teenager, but an innocent one. Today, we're diving into one of the most controversial aspects of the American justice system, the cases of the youngest people ever sentenced to death. These aren't just statistics. These are real stories of children whose lives took the darkest possible turns. Our first case takes us back to 1944, to the small town of Alcolu, South Carolina. On March 23rd, two young white girls, 11-year-old Betty June Binnicker and 8-year-old Mary Emma Thames, went missing while searching for flowers. The next day, their bodies were discovered in a water-filled ditch. Both girls had suffered severe head trauma from what appeared to be a railroad spike or similar tool. The community was in shock and pressured local law enforcement to find the killer quickly. Within hours, suspicion fell on 14-year-old George Stinny Jr., a black boy who lived nearby. Why George? Simply because he was reportedly one of the last people to see the girls alive. He had spoken to them briefly about where they might find flowers. But here's where this case becomes truly disturbing. George was arrested and interrogated without his parents present, without an attorney, and without any recording of what was said. Police claimed he confessed to the murders, describing how he killed the girls with a railroad spike after attempting to assault one of them. But George's family later said that he never confessed, and no written record of this supposed confession existed. The speed of George's trial was breathtaking, and not in a good way. From arrest to execution, only 83 days passed. His trial lasted exactly 1 day. His court-appointed attorney, Charles Plowden, was a tax commissioner with no criminal law experience. He called no witnesses and presented no evidence in George's defense. The all-white jury deliberated for just 10 minutes before returning a guilty verdict. Perhaps the most haunting detail of this entire case was the execution itself. On June 16, 1944, George Stinny Jr. walked into the execution chamber at the South Carolina State Penitentiary. At 5 feet 1 inch tall and weighing just 95 pounds, he was so small that the adult-sized electric chair didn't fit him properly. Prison officials had to use a phone book as a booster seat so the electrodes could make proper contact. Witnesses reported that when the switch was thrown, the oversized mask slipped off his face, revealing his wide, frightened eyes to everyone in the room. George Stinny Jr. became the youngest person executed in the United States in the 20th century. Now let's fast forward to more recent times. Paula's story begins in Gary, Indiana, a city struggling with poverty, crime, and social decay. Born into a troubled family with an abusive alcoholic mother and absent father, Paula's childhood was marked by violence. By age 15, she was already involved in petty crime and struggling with substance abuse. On May 14, 1985, Paula and 3 friends decided to skip school. Instead of heading to class, they planned to get money. They went to the home of 78-year-old Ruth Pelka, a Bible teacher known for her kindness to neighborhood children under the pretense of wanting Bible lessons. When Mrs. Pelk let the girls into her home, they demanded money. When she refused and tried to get them to leave, Paula Cooper stabbed her 33 times with a 12-inch butcher knife. The girls then ransacked the house, stealing $10 and Mrs. Pelk's car. Ruth Pelk's grandson, Bill Pelk, would later describe finding his grandmother's body and how the image haunted him for years. But eventually, in a twist of events, Bill would become one of Paula Cooper's most vocal advocates, arguing against her execution and working toward her redemption.
I became convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt that my grandmother would have had love and compassion for Paula Cooper and her family. I felt she wanted someone in my family to have that same sort of love and compassion. I didn't have any, but so convinced that's what she would have wanted. I begged God to give me love and compassion for Paula Cooper and her family.
Paula was tried as an adult and sentenced to death, making international headlines. Her case sparked protests in Italy, where thousands of people signed petitions opposing her execution. Even Pope John Paul II intervened, calling for mercy for the teenage girl. The international attention forced Americans to confront an uncomfortable question. Should a 15-year-old, regardless of their crime, face the ultimate punishment? Paula's case wound through the courts for years. In 1989, her death sentence was commuted to 60 years in prison when the Indiana Supreme Court ruled that executing someone for a crime committed at 15 violated the state constitution. But Paula's story took another remarkable turn. In prison, she transformed herself. She earned her high school diploma, then a bachelor's degree, and later a master's degree in addiction counseling. She became a mentor to other inmates and worked tirelessly to better herself. In 2013, after serving 28 years in prison, Paula Cooper was released on parole. Bill Pelkey, the grandson of her victim, had by then become her supporter, visiting her in prison and advocating for her release. Tragically, Paula's story didn't have the happy ending many hoped for. On May 23, 2015, just 2 years after her release, Paula Cooper took her own life. She was 45 years old. The pressures of readjusting to life outside prison, combined with the weight of her past, proved too much to bear. In 1993, 17-year-old Christopher Simmons lived in Fenton, Missouri, a middle-class suburb of St. Louis. Unlike some of our previous cases, Christopher came from a relatively stable background. His parents were divorced, but remained involved in his life, and he was an average student without a significant criminal history. But Christopher had developed what psychologists would later describe as a fascination with the idea of committing the perfect murder. On September 8, 1993, Christopher and two friends, Charles Benjamin, 15, and John Tesmer, 16, planned to commit a burglary that would end in murder. Their target was chosen almost randomly, Shirley Crook, a 46-year-old woman who lived alone after her recent divorce. The plan was chilling in its calculated nature. The boys would break into Mrs. Crook's home, tie her up, and take her to a remote location to kill her, making it look like an accident or disappearance. Around 2 a.m., the three teenagers broke into Shirley Crook's home. John Tesmer got cold feet and left, but Christopher and Charles proceeded with their plan. They awakened Mrs. Crook, bound her hands and feet with duct tape and electrical wire, and covered her head with a towel. After stealing items from her home, they forced Mrs. Crook into her minivan and drove to Castlewood State Park. There, they walked her to a railroad trestle bridge over the Merrimack River. Christopher bound her again with more wire, covered her face with duct tape, and threw her from the bridge into the river below. Shirley Crook drowned in the dark waters, conscious when she hit the river. The crime might have remained unsolved, but Christopher couldn't keep quiet. He bragged to friends about the murder, providing details that eventually reached police. Within days, both boys were arrested. Christopher was tried as an adult and sentenced to death. The case made its way through various appeals courts, with Christopher's lawyers arguing that executing someone for a crime committed at 17 violated the Eighth Amendment's prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment. In 2005, the U.S. Supreme Court agreed. In Roper v. Simmons, the court ruled 5-4 that the death penalty for crimes committed by juveniles was unconstitutional. Christopher Simmons' death sentence was commuted to life in prison without parole. He remains incarcerated today, nearly 30 years after his crime. The Roper decision didn't just save Christopher Simmons' life, it removed 72 juvenile offenders from death rows across the country, ensuring that no one else would face execution for crimes committed before their 18th birthday. Our next case takes us to Texas in 1994. Napoleon Beasley was 17 years old and seemed to have everything going for him. He was an honor student at John Tyler High School in Tyler, Texas, president of his senior class, and captain of the football team. His teachers described him as intelligent, charismatic, and destined for success. He had already been accepted to several colleges, but on April 19th, 1994, Napoleon made a decision that would destroy multiple lives and ultimately cost him his own. Napoleon and two friends, 15-year-old Cedric Coleman and 14-year-old Donald Coleman, decided to steal a car. Not just any car, but a luxury vehicle that would make a statement. They had been planning this for weeks, discussing which neighborhoods had the best cars and the lowest security. Their target became John Luddig, a 63-year-old businessman and father of federal appeals, court judge J. Michael Luddig. The choice wasn't personal. Napoleon didn't know John Luddig. He was simply a man with an expensive Mercedes-Benz who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. The plan was supposed to be simple: wait for Luddig to come home, force him to hand over his keys, and drive away in his car. But plans rarely go as planned. When John Luddig pulled into his driveway that evening, Napoleon approached the car with a .45 caliber pistol, slowly pulling it up and aiming straight at Luddig. He shot him twice in the head. The three teenagers fled in Luddig's Mercedes, but they were caught within days. The murder weapon was found in Napoleon's bedroom, and physical evidence linked all three boys to the crime. What made this case particularly shocking was the stark contrast between Napoleon's public persona and his criminal actions. Here was a young man who seemed to represent the best of his generation, intelligent, accomplished, with a bright future ahead of him. Yet, he had coldly murdered an innocent man for a car. Napoleon Beasley was sentenced to death on May 28, 2002, 8 years after the murder. Napoleon Beasley was executed by lethal injection at the age of 25. He was one of the last people executed in the United States for a crime committed as a juvenile. In his final statement, Napoleon expressed remorse for his actions and asked for forgiveness from the Luddig family, but by then, it was too late for words to change anything. Dalton was born in 1963 in Louisiana, into a family marked by poverty, dysfunction, and violence. His childhood was characterized by severe abuse, neglect, and exposure to criminal behavior. By the time he was a teenager, Dalton had already shown signs of serious mental illness. But in the 1970s, understanding and treatment of mental health issues were limited. At age 14, Dalton committed his first serious crime. In 1977, he was involved in the murder of a taxi driver during a robbery. Due to his age, he was sentenced to life in prison, but was paroled after serving only a few years, a decision that would have tragic consequences. At 5 o'clock in the morning on July 2nd, 1981, just months after his release, Dalton, his brother Joseph, Michael George, and Michael Broussard left a club, driving a 1966 Chevrolet with Dalton behind the wheel. The car's taillights weren't working, and within a few hundred feet, Trooper Donald Cleveland signaled the vehicle to stop. Dalton then took a .38 caliber revolver from under the car seat, got out, and approached the officer with the gun hidden against his leg. As he neared the trooper, he fired without warning. Cleveland was struck by 2 bullets and killed. Dalton and his companions fled, but were apprehended several hours later. Psychological evaluations revealed that Dalton suffered from organic brain damage. He had an IQ of 76, with a mental age of 13 years and 6 months. His trial took place in Louisiana in 1982, during a period when the state aggressively pursued death sentences. The all-white jury deliberated for less than an hour before sentencing 18-year-old Dalton to death. His case wound through the appeals process for nearly 2 decades, with his lawyers arguing that executing someone with severe mental illness violated the Constitution. Despite these appeals, Louisiana proceeded with the execution. On May 18, 1990, Dalton Prejean was executed in the electric chair at the age of 30. He had spent 12 years on death row for a crime committed when he was 17. In 1985, 16-year-old Shawn Sers was living in Oklahoma, navigating adolescence while harboring a dark fascination with the occult. That year, Shawn began experimenting with Satanism. He kept a journal filled with references to rituals and demonic entities. He claimed to be possessed by a demon named Ezurat. His behavior at school became erratic, and his relationship with his strict, religious parents grew more strained. But no one imagined the conflict would escalate into a triple homicide.
Shawn Sers, that young man that turned into a killer.
On September 8th, 1985, Shawn walked into a convenience store in Oklahoma City where 32-year-old Robert Paul Bauer was working the night shift. Shawn murdered him because he had refused to sell beer to Shawn's friend, Howard. According to Howard, who wasn't even present, Shawn just wanted to see what it feels like to kill somebody. The murder shocked the community, but there were no leads until months later, when 2 more lives were taken. On the night of March 5th, 1986, Shawn waited until his stepfather and mother had gone to bed. He crept into their room and shot his stepfather, Paul Bellafato, in the head while he slept. Then he turned the gun on his mother, Vonda Bellafato, and shot her at close range. Both died instantly. Shawn called a friend to help stage the scene as a burglary. It didn't take long for police to unravel the truth. Shawn eventually confessed to all 3 murders. He claimed he had been under the influence of satanic forces and couldn't control his actions. At trial, prosecutors portrayed Shawn as a cold, calculating killer who used Satanism as an excuse. The jury was unconvinced by the insanity defense. In 1986, Shawn Sers was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder. He was 17 when he was sentenced to death, making him the youngest person on death row in the United States at the time. For over a decade, Shawn's legal team fought to overturn his death sentence. They argued that he had undiagnosed mental illness at the time of the murders, and that executing someone who was 16 at the time of their crimes violated evolving standards of decency. But in Oklahoma, those arguments fell on deaf ears. On February 4th, 1999, Shawn Sers was executed by lethal injection at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary. He was 29 years old. His last words were addressed to his step-siblings. "All of you who hate me right now and are here to watch me die, when you wake up in the morning, you won't feel any different. You'll hate me just as much as you did tonight. When you wake up and nothing has changed inside you, turn to God and He will be there for you. Turn to God and He will heal you. Let Him touch your hearts. Don't hate for the rest of your lives. I love you all." And just before receiving the lethal injection, he said, "Release my spirit so I can praise you. Release my spirit so I can worship you." These stories are not just about crime. They are about justice, fairness, and growing up. They are about the difference between a bad choice and a broken life. Some of these teens killed. Some were innocent. Some changed. Some never got the chance. But they all make us ask the same question. Should the state ever kill a child? Let us know what you think in the comments. And subscribe if you want more stories like this. Thank you for watching.